This recording is protected by copyright. No part may be reproduced without the prior permission of the University of South Australia.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Lovely instant silence, I love it. I think most of you have been very prompt in coming in, and I'd like us to start as near to on time as we can because we have a very full program this morning. Lovely to see so many of you here. For those of you I don't know, I'm Margaret Anderson from History SA. This is the 21st State History Conference, and I'm not sure how many conferences the Oral History Association has had, but this is a joint conference presented between History SA and the Oral History Association of Australia and the David Uniapon College of Advanced Education and Research here at Uni SA. We have Uncle Lewis O'Brien, Kaurna Elder, here this morning to perform a Kaurna welcome, and I'd like to ask him to join us now.
Maruichanga, Kaurna Miana Nai Wangani, Mani te Punigani Adana. Nai Biriko, Mankalankala, Tandanya, Minaku. Nai Te Yungandalia, Nai Te Yakanandalia, Padni Adlu Wadu. On behalf of the Kaurna people, I welcome you all to Kaurna country, and I do as ambassador of the Adelaide Plains people. My brothers, my sisters, let's walk in harmony. Our people ran conferences in this country for thousands of years. The Germans wrote the word down, Bumba Bunbulya, so we got groups of people coming together for thousands of years. And they came to us for education, and we had Kaurna males be educated, had to be educated for 25 years to earn the right to marry. And when they came to us, we found out extra stuff. We found that every nation in this country had knowledge that no one else possessed. And I'll give you a couple of examples. The Burong people in Victoria, they prided themselves in knowing more about the stars than any other group in the country. They taught us about the stars because we were educators. Now you can go to Mawson Lake and see Kaurna by the stars, so we learned from them. Pinjarra people sing more notes than anyone else in the world. And I said to a musicologist, why is that? Why do they sing more notes? He said they have no finger instruments. Fingers limit the notes you'll play, therefore the notes you'll sing. I thought, wow. And so there's a little example of what our people achieved with conferences, and that's why this country lasted 60,000 years, the culture, because of mixing together and sharing knowledge. Thank you.
Thanks, Uncle Lewis. And every time he does that, I learn something new. I hadn't heard either of those stories before. Can I acknowledge that we have a number of organisations who work with us each year to produce these conferences, and this year we have been supported by the National Library of Australia, State Records of South Australia, the History Council of South Australia, the Historical Society of South Australia, the National Archives of Australia, Museums Australia, Wakefield Press and Disc Edits. So thank you to all of those people. Without your assistance, we couldn't continue to manage to present this conference. And now it is my very great pleasure to introduce to you Professor Stanley Nangala, who is the head of school of the David Uniapon School, and he'll say just a few words of welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. And isn't it wonderful when we can come to a place here and hear from a traditional elder, welcome to country. And I really take pride in that. I'm actually from the Kimberley of Western Australia. That's where all my language groups are from. And coming to Adelaide, it's just awesome because we have an organisation such as the University of South Australia that welcomes and acknowledges people on country, and the country itself belonging to the custodians of the Kaurna nation. I'm just going to say a very few words as a sponsor to this event, and I would like to offer my congratulations to Margaret and to all the committees and of the Oral History, to the Oral History Association of Australia and History South Australia in planning the Biennial National Conference of the Oral History Association of Australia and the 21st State History Conference entitled She Said, He Said, Reading, Writing and Recording History. As one of the sponsors of the conference, I am delighted and excited about the breadth and scope of the papers being presented over the next few days. For those of you that do not know me, I was appointed to the position as head of school and professor of the David Unipen College for Indigenous Education and Research in January of this year, and it is with much pleasure that I've inherited an academic profile rich in history and cultural knowledge and understanding. I originally was appointed as head of school up at James Cook University, where it was the Tri-City Nation city campus, where I had Townsville, Cairns and Singapore. And it's just wonderful to know that coming down to a city university that's so rich with history and the issue that the blend is just important. So from the early days of the Faculty of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Studies of the former South Australian Institute of Technology to the present day, the Unipen School, which is part of the David Unipen College of Indigenous Education and Research at this university, Aboriginal Studies and later Australian Studies have been positioned alongside each other, which is unique and I think the first ever in Australia. In 2005, my school offered a Bachelor of Arts with 3 specialisations: Aboriginal Policy and Management, Aboriginal Studies and Australian Studies. This later developed into 2 separate degree programs in Australian Studies and Aboriginal Studies, and following this in 2012 into the current flagship undergraduate program, the Bachelor of Arts in Indigenous Culture and Australian Study has now occurred. Fundamentally, this program offers the opportunity for students to study Australian Studies, Australian history and or Indigenous knowledges. What you may not be aware of is that it was the foresight of Emeritus Professor Denise Bradley, AC, former Vice-Chancellor of this university, who focused the university on the importance of offering a blend of Australian Studies and Australian history, and history knowledges and history. So it is with pleasure all these years later that I am now able to support an ongoing commitment to this undertaking at undergraduate and postgraduate level in my school, as part of the university's commitment to Aboriginal reconciliation. So what does this mean for us as academics and historians? To me, this is a journey we each have to make for ourselves as scholars and researchers. What can be said, however, is that we need each to challenge our own learnings, values and ethics in order to achieve a balanced viewpoint in how we guide the future in sharing Australian and Indigenous histories. This is an exciting time in our future, a coming of age in the Academy as the sharing of histories recognises and values knowledges in all its guises. I therefore wish you well and hope that you enjoy your time here at the University of South Australia. Thank you and good morning.
Thank you, Stanley, very much. It's now a great pleasure to introduce, well, I don't probably need to introduce her to many of you, Jill Adams, who is the President of the Oral History Association of Australia, and she will in turn chair the first session. So would you please welcome Jill.
Thank you, Margaret. It's a great pleasure to be here at this conference that's been jointly organised by History SA, which makes it all the better. The Oral History Association is really thrilled to have that association and to be able to put this conference on. I'm the president of the Oral History Association for one more day, which is sad but good. It's nice to hand the banner over. But I'm really here this morning to introduce our keynote speaker, Rina Benmayor, and to welcome her to Adelaide, all the way from the West Coast. I always get my coasts mixed up in America, the West Coast of America, and to interrupt her very busy schedule to be here. Rina is Professor of Oral History, Literature and Latino Studies at California State University, Monterey Bay, where she also directs its Oral History and Memory Archive. She served the international oral history community as its president, and she's also been president of the Oral History Association of the USA. She's written and co-written books on romance, language, migration, citizenship and identity, and has conducted many of her own oral history projects. Currently, she's teaching and directing a study of Pan-Asian memories of the Salinas Chinatown, which is the only Chinatown that's still existing between San Francisco and Los Angeles on the west coast of America. Her keynote this morning is about that project, and it's a highlight of our conference, so we're delighted to welcome you here. The project is just very briefly showing how society, space and history intersect when we remember the past. And with that, I'd like to welcome Rina to the podium.
Thank you, Jill. Thank you, Margaret. Thank you, Uncle Lewis. Thank you, Stanley. Sorry, names escape you at a certain age. It's really an honor and a pleasure for me to be here. I've been invited on a number of occasions and never have been able to make it because it coincides with the beginning of our school year, and it's very difficult to leave 3 classes behind. But this year I lucked out because I only teach 1 class this semester, so it made it possible. I'm really pleased to be here, and I especially want to thank the university and the Oral History Association of Australia and June Edwards, who was my contact and has just been wonderful all along in getting me here and picking me up, etc. So I thank all of you. The other thing is that I always had a very warm relationship with Australia. I have family here, and I've known some of you for many, many, many years, so in a way this is like coming home. What I'm going to present to you today is very much a work in progress. It's a concept and initial design for what I call an augmented reality oral history walking tour. It's a lot of words. And the subject is a Chinatown in the city of Salinas that is, as Jill said, the only extant Chinatown that exists between San Francisco, largest Chinatown that exists between San Francisco and LA. There are many Chinatowns in California, but most were razed to the ground. In presenting this talk, I want to situate you a bit. The project began when a group of community folks came to us and said, we want to develop some oral histories of our community. And these were members of the Chinese and Japanese and Filipino communities who have been working together in unity in this group called the Asian Cultural Experience. And we know that Filipinos are not technically Asians, but that's the name that they use. So these are people who have lived in this community for generations and are coming together now in order to engage in cultural and historical preservation of the community. And you'll see in a while why. The idea, the imagination of all of this is to create a Chinatown cultural center and museum that will be housed in a historic building, a building that has historic landmark status, cannot be torn down now, that was called the Old Republic Cafe. And it was the most famous Chinese restaurant in the whole of Salinas. Salinas is not big. It's about 150,000 people, according to the 2010 census. But it was the famous Chinese restaurant in town. The project that I've been working on is with a team of people is one that has 3 prongs to it. One is to create a core gallery exhibition that will be multimedia and interactive inside the space of this old Chinese restaurant, not unlike what District 6 Museum in Cape Town was and has been developed into. The second tier is this augmented oral history walking tour, which will be both on-site and web-based, so you can take either one. And the third is a set of intercultural dialogues that will bring members of all the communities involved together to have some historical dialogue about the transformation and the ways in which people imagine the transformation of this community. And I should mention that we've just this summer got a wonderfully, very coveted National Endowment for the Humanities planning grant, which is equivalent to the grant that you got, Alistair, here in Australia, and also a grant from the California Humanities Council and a local grant from the Community Foundation. So we have quite a bit of support from the national to the local. In imagining what I wanted to do with this walking tour is I call it Re-imagining Salinas Chinatown because it is a kind of creative rendition drawn from all of these memories. So I felt that the re was important there. And working on reading around cultural geography, I landed on a very, I think, useful theoretical framework provided by a cultural geographer who's well known for his work in Los Angeles called Edward Soja, in which he talks about the third space. And I'll get to that definition shortly. But this oral history walking tour rests on the premise that oral history constructs a rich memoried third space that has implications for the physical revitalization and transformation of the community. And that's really the ultimate goal of all of this, is what's going to happen in this place. As you all probably know, cultural geography and oral history hasn't had a very vibrant cross-conversation, and so this is an attempt to not just bring content into space, but really go deeper into the meanings of space and the meanings of memory triggered by space itself. So I have 4 questions that I'm addressing today. I hope I'll get through them. The first is a theoretical question: how might concepts from cultural geography frame the use of oral history to represent the lived experience of a community? The second is a structural issue: what are the advantages and challenges in constructing a virtual walking tour through primary voices and augmented reality? And the third is a representational issue, and that is a question the bugaboo of mine is like, can we please design virtual walking tours that are a little more dynamic, a little more performative, a little more creative than just click, voice, click, voice, click, voice. And lastly, how might the recovery of memory and such a walking tour as a representation of that lead to a more equitable community transformation? I think many of you know about transformations of communities and how cities come in and they reorganize and they don't remember and they don't memorialize what existed there before. And so this is an attempt by the community to not do that, to have some kind of a revitalization, but on the community's terms. Okay. I don't know, I suppose most of you know where California is, but I just kind of like to situate Salinas for you because you may not know that. So I'm just going to go very far out here. Okay, so there's California, there's Salinas, more or less in the middle, and it's about 2 hours south of San Francisco. And it's the gateway to the Central Valley. This is the Central Valley, which is the salad bowl of the world. That all your broccoli and all your lettuce and strawberries and everything comes from there. This is also Steinbeck country. I'm sure you have at some point read The Grapes of Wrath or seen the movie. So that's where that location is. The important thing about Salinas Chinatown was that it developed as a result of the gold rush. People who went to pan gold and didn't find it started to come back from the mountains, and eventually with the railroad building, they ended up in San Francisco. And then when the railroad was built, they started to move south. And they actually, the Chinese were responsible for the clearing of the swamps in Salinas and the creation of the agricultural land. So they were the beginning. They came in the late 1860s. And they were followed by successive waves of, now let's see, how do I get out of here? I could just minimize this and then we go back here. Okay. They were followed by Japanese immigrants, and then later followed by Filipinos, and then by Latinos, by Mexicans. And now Salinas is the Chinatown is inhabited by the homeless. So you see the whole. Now, this is a map of Chinatown. It is, as you can see, a small area. I don't know how to get. Yeah, minimize. Get. Okay. So we're in the center of Salinas, and you'll see here. Here are the railroad tracks. Here is the main street of Salinas where the National Steinbeck Center is sitting, this building here. And across the railroad tracks is Chinatown. But it's totally disconnected because of that and because of an underpass that was built. And so there's an effort now in this area to revitalize the whole center, including the train station, which is a very historic landmark, etc. And so that gives you a little bit of a visual of where Chinatown is. Okay. So to follow up a little bit on the history, you have the Chinese laborers who come in the 1860s, clear the swamps. 1882 is the Chinese Exclusion Act, which prevented Chinese from acquiring land first, and the immigration patterns. And then they established some of these laborers established a small little Chinatown that burnt down in 1893, and then a second one was created, which is what we're talking about today. In 97, the Japanese come in the 1920s, the Filipinos, and then in the 40s, the Mexican braceros, who replaced the Japanese farm laborers when they were interned during World War II. And then urban removal and, condemn buildings and tear down Chinatown. So there's lots of empty lots, and it's kind of a hard neighborhood to get into and hard to get out. There's only one-way streets, and they did that on purpose, the police department, because there's drugs going on in there, etc. And so the homeless found that as a kind of little haven. And there's a soup kitchen there and some shelters, and they've been there for 30 years. So they are a part of the community, and therein lies the challenge. Here's just a few images of these are the old wooden buildings that got torn down. This is the Buddhist temple. Built in the 1920s. Here you see a group of Filipino workers, and it's hard to see, but with some young Chinese boys, and taken on the street that's known as Japantown. One street is Soledad Street, known as Chinatown. The other street is known as Lake Street, known as Japantown. The Filipinos are all the way, mixed in, and the Mexicans also. But we'd call it the whole thing generically Chinatown. So even the Japanese and the Filipinos feel that they're part of Chinatown. Anyway, this is one of the tongs. And here you've got Filipino workers in the fields. This was part of a Japanese exhibit. And here are folks making tofu. There was a tofu shop on Lake Street, so they're pounding tofu. I didn't know how tofu was made. Okay. The idea for this walking tour emerged when I took my class. I teach an oral history class every year, and from 2008 we were focused on this project of collecting oral histories from the members of these communities. But the idea of the walking tour was triggered by Mr. Wellington Lee he came to the class and he was telling about his life story. And let's hope this works. Okay. Now, this is the Google map that shows you the space where his house used to be.
Anyway, when you enter, it's a storefront. My grandfather's store was there. There was a counter, and there was in my day, when I was there, when I was growing up, the cash register was under the counter, and there was a huge black safe, and there was shelves with Crocs, jars, and packages, tied up packages of I don't know what, but it was left over from long ago, because by the 1950s, the store was not working. It was not in operation. So the storefront, there was a storefront, and then from the storefront there was a living room, and in the living room we had rows and rows of family portraits. So most of these pictures are from those the pictures that hung up in the living room. So from the living room there was my grandfather's office and his bedroom, and then there was a hallway that led to the kitchen and a dining room, and then to a porch, and then to the backyard, and upstairs were like 4 bedrooms. It was like a mansion. I mean, compared to where I'm living now, it's like a mansion.
I love that. It was a mansion. And to them, it was indeed. Okay. So just a little bit about the project. This historic preservation project is part of something larger called the Salinas Chinatown Renewal Project. And that's involved with figuring out how to get some foot traffic back on the street, some small commercial enterprises, some housing for the homeless, service, like a service campus for homeless needs, and questions of safety. So there's a whole larger aspect to this, which will enable or disable our idea of doing a museum, and that's what's in the big question mark. The Asian Cultural Experience, as I said, was in charge of the historical and cultural preservation. And since 2008, my students and I have collected about 125 hours of videotaped oral histories, about maybe 115 people we've interviewed. And it's involved more than 80 students. And as you can see, the narrators come from these different communities. And this semester, as we speak, some of my students are out we have a learning center out in the community that gives computer training to homeless people, to become more computer literate. And they're going to be piloting 4 or 5 interviews with the homeless about their life stories and about what they know about Chinatown and its history. So that's going to be an important link to enable us to understand how these communities could possibly all have a stake in this revitalization. And of course, the material is all archived. Okay. So before going into the walking tour, I'd like to say just a little bit about go back to my 4 questions at the beginning. And the first one is about the theoretical issue. How might concepts from cultural geography frame the use of oral history to represent the lived experience of a community? And here I'm drawing on, of course, Yi-Fu Tuan's notion of space. Space becomes place when you have memory and you imbue meaning into the space. And Henri Lefebvre's concepts of perceived physical space, conceived mental space, and lived space. And these were kind of the jumping off points for Edward Soja's work on first, second, and third space. So they kind of parallel. The first space is obviously the physical space, what you see. The second is what you don't see, and the kinds of meanings, historical, emotional, that are inside that physical space. And the third space is the transformative space of the imagination. And the third space tries to capture the social relations, not just the history, but the social relations within the community. How did people interact? How did people relate? What were the power relations going on? What was the solidarity? What were the conflicts that took place? Which is not always so easy to get doing oral histories because people don't often disclose, dirty laundry. But the idea, I think we've got a pretty good sense of where the rubbing points might have been and where some of the conflicts are, and that's where we're hoping that this walking tour can begin to address some of that. Okay. So in terms of Chinatown, I don't know if you noticed before, but there are still some physical remnants of the architecture. There's like these balconies and, pagoda eaves and stuff like that. And there are churches in the neighborhood that still are visibly representational. But there's no like this, you're now entering Chinatown, having a big arc or something like that, archway like you have in San Francisco. Lots of empty lots, lots of no foot traffic, a lot of drug dealing. There is a community garden and a soup kitchen and a learning center and things like that. Lots of bars still and a few casinos, but it's pretty much a blighted neighborhood. That's the first space. The second space is really where we all feel most comfortable as historians and oral historians. This is the work that we do. So what does this space mean to you? What does it mean to people? It's a subjective space, and as Sean Field, I love his work because even though it's South Africa and apartheid, it still resonates. Where he calls a sense of place is an imaginative act that combines ongoing sensory inputs from the surrounding social and physical landscape with a person's internal world of selected and constructed memories. So you can see how even the geographical framework of first space, second space, we understand this. I would also argue that Chinatown is what Nora would call a lieu de mémoire, because it does not only inscribe individual identity, but very much a collective identity. And this is an interesting question here because people relate as I'm Chinese, I'm Japanese, I'm Filipino, but they also have a collective memory of we were all here together. So there's very much a sense of we have this group, this ACE group that meets once a month, all members of the community around the table, all working together on this revitalization project. So it's a very, the collective memory is quite real. Now, here's how Soja defines the third space. He says, third space is a radically different way of looking at and interpreting and acting to change the embracing spatiality of human life. Now, he's a geographer, and he's concerned with pushing the envelope for the geographers. But he also, in doing that, brings in cultural studies and things that we're more familiar with to define this third space. Talking about it as a continually changing space, not something that's like set in time, a nostalgic place of the past, but a place that was constantly in motion and constantly changing. And that's how we have to think about this historical preservation ourselves, as something that is fluid, and there are new elements here, and we have to work with that. The interdependence of spatiality, historicality, and sociality, and this is his sort of triumvirate here. Space, its memory, its history, and then the real lived experience. What went on? How did people relate? How did people work with each other or not? So the sociality of the space has to do with who's in the space, why are they there, what are the political actions of disenfranchised communities as they attempt to transform their space and their circumstances. All communities are attempting to do this at all times, to transform. So let's look at this transformational project that we have in terms of understanding what the politics and how the politics of that space will affect our work. So now let's go to the tour. And I'd like to spend a fair amount of time on that. How am I doing? Oh, okay. Thank you. All right, so the tour is a kind of dual format. And we've started to design, and it's a very preliminary design that was kind of put together for me coming here, so it will change, is the web-based site. And then there will be an on-site version that you, with a smart device, you'll be able to walk around the neighborhood, and out will pop a voice. Seeing things out in the open is not so great. You can't really see sun glare and all, but you will be able to hear the voices. And so that's the second part of this that we have yet to work on. So then how does the concept of third space translate into the representational format of this walking tour? So this is the initial website for the walking tour. And let me just scroll down so you can see the whole thing. Here we have the banner. It's an old picture of Chinatown. Here is the actual walking tour. Then we will have a brief history of Chinatown down here with clips that are coming not from me, the historian, or anybody else, the historian or the docent, but it's going to be members of the community telling their versions of the history of the community and their particular group. And then we will have down here an archive site where we will be able to archive either entire videos or good portions of videos for people who want to go more in depth and listen to more stories. There will be a historical timeline, and unfortunately it scrolls, but it's not scrolling here for some reason. It goes across, and you see the timeline there, and we'll have historic photographs underneath that. And so that kind of gives you a sense of the way the walking tour website is going to look. Okay, so with that, I want to go into it, and let's take a look. Now, in terms of this dual structure, what we've been basically working on is marrying Google Maps with a program called Layar, L-A-Y-A-R, and that's the platform for the on-site. And I don't know too much about these technologies, but I know that works. Okay. The other thing that's important about this website is that it's going to be an open site, because there will be a place here for you to tell your Chinatown story. And that, I'm hoping we can do that in video through YouTube, as well as people just writing in and giving us their stories that they want to contribute. And then we could eventually pin them to the map. Okay, so let's talk about how this pathway, how the issue of structure. I particularly wanted to get away from the master narrative voice of one person telling us the whole story and giving us the whole tour. Because that, to me, is not a third space tour. The third space tour is to recreate the lived experience so that you go into the tour and you get a sense of that experience yourself without somebody giving you a canned explanation. So, for instance, if we go to the first stop on the tour, which is the Republic Cafe. Yes. We start with the street view. Now, the street view, this, I don't know what year this was taken, but it hasn't changed very much, is the Republic Cafe. Now, here is the new chop suey sign that was restored, and this building is now a landmark building, cannot be torn down. But this is kind of what the street looks like. It's like, it's kind of an abandoned, and I will just scroll around to give you the visual sense. It will be a challenge. Now you see here some of the old architectural features here, for example, that we would like to preserve. This is a soup kitchen called Dorothy's Place that was, before it was a pool hall. So this is kind of a creative redo of that space. So anyway, so that's the point of the Republic Cafe. The street view is what you get first. Now, where is it? I've lost it. Okay, it's up here. Okay, so here we are in front of the Republic Cafe. And now let's hear what people have to say about it.
So when did you go to Chinatown as a child?
Oh, I must have been about 10, 8, 9 or 10. And that was fun for me because I had friends there, little girls, Martha Chin, the Chin family. And I went through high school with Martha and her brothers. They were nice. And the Atais, Wallace Atai, Stanley Atai, he was good looking. Whenever my father would win a little money, you know, in that Pai Gao game, we would eat at this Republic restaurant where the waitresses were mothers of these children running around in the street too. And they dressed so beautifully in the Chinese costume. But the Republic was a very good restaurant. I don't know if it's still there. I doubt it.
So that's Gertrude. Now how do I get out of here? Oh, this way. Yeah. Oh, I guess I'm going to have to go in there. Now, let's contrast her with, we've done a few group interviews.
We had a restaurant, and the three sisters, we got old enough, we had waited on tables at the Republic Cafe.
Mm-hmm. These are four
that was during the years World War II, and we met all these soldiers. Oh, sure. All these Chinese soldiers from Fort Order would say, "Where is their Chinese restaurant?" And there was Republic Cafe. Mm-hmm. And you know all the rest. I was well behaved. I know.
Well, I was told that you wore, the women who served in the Republic Cafe wore these very beautiful costumes.
No. You're lucky you had a uniform. They can show you a picture later. I just wore a dress, a regular dress. Yeah. No, wasn't that fancy those days. Didn't have the money to do all that. I didn't do
So who worked at the Republic Cafe?
I did. When it started, I was just supposed to be the bookkeeper and the cashier. And then they hired a young lady from San Francisco, and she was there for just about 2 months. I think Salinas was too boring for her, so she quit. So I took over waiting on tables, and I liked it because you have contact with everybody, and on weekends the families come, and it was real nice. I enjoyed it. But we weren't just waiting on tables, you know. We had to dry dishes and peel water chestnut and the gauki and all that. Yeah, we did a lot more than was asked of us.
For some reason, this should work differently, but it isn't today. So, so then you notice that I'm playing with contrasts and juxtapositions to try to create a more complex rather than a master one vision of this. Here's an interesting.
When I came to town, my parents wanted to introduce us to the older generation that was here. So we had a party at the Republic Cafe, which was one of the few good Chinese restaurants in town. We had several tables back there. I don't know who was there. Mostly, probably, doctors and some of their friends in the Rotary Club or something like that. So we had the reception there. And Chinatown at the time was had a rough reputation. It was off limits to the soldiers at Fort Ord because of the gambling during World War II, because of the gambling and other evil things that were going on there. I had a really ugly experience when we were going there, and there was this old prostitute. She was scrawny, and she was old. I mean, she was really old. I was 25 at the time, and she was probably in her 50s, and had led a hard life because her face looked like hell. She had more makeup on than Bozo the Clown. I mean, I'm not kidding. And she was scrawny, and she had a miniskirt on and stuff like that. And she said, "Seasoned meat is the best." I almost lost my appetite. It was awful. It was awful. I mean, I couldn't imagine how she could possibly get any customers, but it was terrible. But the food was good. But the food was good, and you sort of had to ignore the evil surroundings. So the evil surroundings in that.
Evil surroundings. And then here I've got 3 videos that this is my editing. We have a professional editor who's going to make this much more interesting.
What do you know about the Republic Cafe? Oh, they had some very good food at the time. Since I was on my beat, I used to try to eat there as much as possible because I preferred that food, the Oriental food, and it was very classy, especially for the area. You go in there and the tablecloths, you have linens, you have proper glass and knives and forks and so forth. And if you prefer to eat with chopsticks, you also had chopsticks. For Salinas, as far as I was concerned at that time, it was one of the classiest places in town.
Well, like a lot of Chinese restaurants in those days were kind of dark and dank. One of the they used to have semi-private rooms. A lot of restaurants where they would have it'd be curtained off. They'd have a bunch of rooms off on one side, and they had partitions between the tables and a little curtain, so that when you ordered the table, that it was your table, your family was there, and you couldn't see anybody else except the waiter running in and out, and that was all. And so the Republic was kind of dark and dank, and had typical Chinese tables there. But it was too small to have it. But it was kind of dark and dank. I don't think it was very wide. I mean, it was no more wide than this room.
I grew up with a lot of Chinese people. I remember the Republic Cafe. Now, the Republic Cafe was one of the most famous Chinese restaurants, I think, here in Monterey County, and I remember them having parties, and people would just go in there, and I used to go in there as a child, and I had my favorite dish. But most of all, I remember growing up with one of the cook's son, which was Mr. Yi. Mr. Yi was the cook there forever. And his wife was also participated in the restaurant. And I remember Mrs. Yi wearing her traditional Chinese dress with the wooden shoes. And it wasn't like your other typical restaurants now, but I think the Culture restaurant was there, and the floors were wooden, and you had your own private booth to eat in. But I remember going there with my dad, my mom, and my sisters. We all had our favorite dishes, but most of all, it was more of a Chinese cultured restaurant. You could see everything about China there. You know, you would look at the walls, and they had all these lanterns, and they had the pictures, and as I reflect back as a adult, it'd be like you were in China if you went inside that restaurant.
So here you see 3 different views from 3 different perspectives. One is the Latino cop who found it to be really classy. The second is the Chinese doctor who found it dark and dank, but the food was good. And the Filipino Mexican guy who remembers it as a child. You know, so you've also got 3 generational memories going on there. So my whole purpose in this was to try to find pieces, and this is just the very beginning. We've got lots of stuff to put in here. Now, these places are numbered just because we had to have a way of linking the content to the site. But my purpose, or what I hope, is that people will actually wander through the site and not go in any particular order, kind of meander through it, eavesdrop on people, and get that third space feel of what the life of the community was like from these different voices of different generations. And Al, thinking about generations, we too are working with the people who were, maybe born in the late 20s are the eldest, and all the way up to people born in the 60s. So that's the range we're working with. So that's the idea of making it a kind of space where you can explore yourself. And then the question of the juxtaposition and contrast of material. I very much want to have most of the entries here be like these mini documentaries, where you've got multiple voices coming in and edited much more finely than this. I don't know if any of you have heard a program that comes out in the U.S. called Radio Lab. It's on the national, on NPR, National, stands for anyway, National Public Radio. And the concept is that you have sentences that are interrupted. You know, you've got voices coming in within a sentence to produce like a collaged, effect. And I want to use some of that. The purpose is to make this more performative, more dynamic, using old documentary film techniques, to just bring different voices together. And so that when you're looking, Stephen High talks about how your attention span on the web is even shorter than it is anywhere else. And so my challenge is to how to make the attention span a teeny bit longer so you get a little bit, so that you're captured a little bit more. And even though you might have to click, at least you know that there's something more interesting on the other side of a click than just one talking voice. We're also working with images, and right now we have a project going that was funded locally to go around and scan and capture people's images of, historical images of the neighborhood, of their families in the neighborhood, and et cetera. And we're scanning and archiving those for use in the exhibit and the walking tour. So, and we also have some soundscapes that were created by a musician. Not sure how yet that will work, if it will work, but it's something to be explored. So the master narrative has gone down the toilet, and the timeline is going to be on the website, so people can. We're going to add into that timeline also voices, so that people can kind of get a sense of who's talking when about what period. And then the other thing that I found to be a real challenge is the selection of the content is always a challenge. But what do you do when you have really good content, but it says nothing about place? It's not anchored in geography. So what do I do with those really important pieces of memory? And let's see if I can get out of this. Go back here. What I've noticed is that, we have, just like we have different kinds of space, we also have different kinds of memories. So you've got visual memories, you've got experiential memories, and you've got evaluative memories, what I call evaluative memories, where the person actually makes a judgment about what they're telling you. It's sort of like a meta step back to evaluate what the narration that they're giving you. So how then can we map non-geographical memories into the physical landscape? And now this is a very crude attempt on my part. It will be much more finely edited, and we'll probably use a lot more collaging and juxtaposition to achieve this. But here's one example. Oh, no. Oh, it's not working? Oh, please. Now I'm lost. It's supposed to open with a click. I've lost it. I can find it on my computer, though, I think, and play it from there. No? Why doesn't it want to play? Huh? To where? Open file. I knew something like this would happen. This? Well, I'm just going to have to tell you what it is. Can you find it? Yeah. It's an interview in which she's talking about how she grew up and about the house that her father had a restaurant and a school house. They're Japanese, but they were on. Goes a little bit to that story, and she talks about the tournament, how they were away. She has a childhood memory of her Chinese friend, Lou. She's lost track of her. All of this is brought her back. Yes, they came home from school. They could not walk down the road together. They had to split at the top of the road and other, and both wanted it. Right before, during the actual war. And so these are the kinds of pieces that are not anchored in the environment, but yet they're critical. What the lived relationships were. These are children. Their memories, a lot of the memories of children were as being happy memories. Baseball, but they don't have feelings about. But so these are the memories that we're trying to put into that act. Well, it wasn't.
Ode. She was.
I think we can just. I think you all took the point, right? Okay. So I just want to go back then, thank you, to one more piece of slide in the tour. To show you how in this tour, for example, Wellington will give a brief history.
Salinas has always had Chinese since the very beginning. Developed into a town in 1865. There were Chinese here, at least one Chinese in the years beginning in 1865, 1860. And of course, they came as laborers, farm workers, field workers, railroad workers, road workers, male laborers that came here in the 1860s, 1870s after the railroads and the gold mining up north. A lot of them came here because there were jobs, and they helped clear the land, clean up the sloughs and whatnot. So they had a part, a small part, but continuous part in the agriculture of this area.
That's an example of how the members of the community themselves will tell the story. And here's an example of the archival and we've very purposefully not erased the interviewers from the images, so you'll actually see the
March 7th, 2011. We're in the home of May Sakasagawa. I'm Teresa Eckert. I am Stephanie Grijalva. And we're just going to talk a little bit about May's family and her experiences here and in Japantown in the Salinas area before the war. So could you tell us, just to get us started, could you give us a little bit of background on, your grandparents and your parents and how they came to be here in this area?
Well,
what's going on here.
Maternal grandparents came from Hiroshima, Japan. They first went to Hawaii.
Yeah. Well, this is just to give you an idea. You all know what an oral history sounds like. So she does talk about Lake Street and her grandmother setting up a boarding house. So this is essentially the beginnings of this walking tour. And so then in terms of how we end up, where am I? Oh, gosh. I think something is absolutely stuck here now. So let's go to... Okay, so this is the idea of the transformation. We have some very, interesting designs. Up on the top right is the inside of the Republic Cafe. Every year we have an Asian festival, and we open up the Republic Cafe, and people come in, and we've put pictures on the walls, and soon we'll have a video going, and to try to make this a little more of a put it into people's mental landscapes. So then the real issue at the end of the day is, does something like this walking tour contribute to a broader understanding of the shared histories of these communities? In what ways can this walking tour be used as a tool to create broader understanding? For the homeless, for example, who may not have any idea of the past history, this would be important. At the same time, the rest of the communities don't have very much understanding about who the homeless are and what their stories are. So trying to make this space a more inclusive one, which can be, I think, helped through these kinds of projects, virtual projects, and sort of show these things to the community, have people take the tour and learn more about it. I mean, the homeless are on the street all the time, and give them devices and go around and listen to the stories that come out of the buildings and the empty lots. So we're going to end up, hopefully, once we get the planning grant, we've got the planning grant, now we need the implementation grant, but the idea is that these intercultural dialogues are going to be the beginning point of these cross-cultural conversations, cross-community conversations, to really see then how each community imagines the Chinatown of the future, and in what ways can our work facilitate that everybody is represented and their voices are visible for future generations. So with that, I think I'm done. Did I make my... Do we have time for questions?
Rina, thank you. We do. Rina has asked if we could have some time for questions at the end of her talk. So we've got about just under 10 minutes. But I'd just like to point out that you can speak to Rina at any stage during the conference in our breaks over the next couple of days, and I'm sure she'd be delighted to talk further with you about her project and her presentation. I do also need to tell you that this is being recorded, and we've got 2 roving mics. So if you could just say who you are, perhaps before you ask the question, and keep your preamble to a minimum so that we can get lots of questions in. Thanks.
Questions? Comments? Yes.
Thank you. I'm Aviva Shebar, and I perform oral history. Something jumped out at me when you were listing off the Chinese, the Japanese, the Mexican, the African Americans, and then the homeless. It jarred with me in many ways, or some ways, and I see homelessness as being transitional. When you say the homeless, as in following on from the Japanese, etc., does the term the homeless in that sense help to cement what really ought to be a transitional phase into a permanent state? And are there children born under these circumstances who are then the homeless children who beget the homeless?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we're all at the stage where we're finding that the term homeless is kind of not very useful in some ways because it really groups a lot of different types of people together. There are the homeless who are war veterans. There are homeless. There are people who are the working poor and are out of jobs and homes. There are people who were released in the 1980s from mental institutions and halfway houses were closed, and so they didn't have any place to be. There are not many children on Soledad Street. And I certainly don't think any children have been born there. So the term itself is fraught and problematic, but they've been there since the late 1970s, and we're now in 2000. They are the community residents. And so in that sense, there is a certain permanence about them. You know, the only alternative is if the city decides to move them to somewhere else, and that's, again, I don't think it's going to happen because the city is quite content with them having found Chinatown. And so there is an attempt now to build some housing, like 90 units in that neighborhood. And many people will go into those units if they can afford to. I'm not sure what the funding is for it. But there are homeless who prefer to be on the street as well. And so that's a whole different, you know, it's a mixed bag. But I do see it in some ways as a permanence. And I also think it's important to recognize, even if they are transient, to recognize there is a community there. They know each other. They are working with each other every day. So in that sense, there is a community. It's the best way I can explain it.
Yeah, I understand that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Try this one. Yeah, John Mannion from Northern South Australia. I'm just curious, the whole concept of the idea, who's it targeted at? What's the audience? I do a fair bit of work in regional and remote South Australia where we've got small communities. You said 150,000 was small. Well, these range from a population of 10 up to 200. And they're trying to reinvent themselves through tourism, but there's a reluctance on the individuals to talk about their experiences, particularly in a place like Maree, where there has been friction in the past between so-called Afghans, Aborigines and whitefellas. And so we tend to get one or two outspoken people who speak for the whole community, so you don't get the broad cross-section like you're getting, I think. So I'm just wondering what your audience is. These communities where I work seem to be marketing it tourism. That's their saviour, they believe. And
yeah, that's a good question, who the audience is. Well, tourism is a bit difficult given the physical situation. Not too many tourists are going to go down, you know, and see homeless people and drugs on the streets. Although, you know, the Chinese tell us, hey, you know, there's always been drugs down here. This was gambling. This was, you know, opium dens. This was casinos. This was, and there still are casinos there. So this is, you know, the low life kind of. But it was, somebody described it as the Las Vegas of Salinas, you know, because we had a military base close by, one of the biggest military bases, which is where my university is now standing. And so all the soldiers would come down, you know, on Saturday nights, and, you know, the prostitutes would be there. So it was like Hollywood, you know. I don't think too many tourists from out of town are going to come down there. What we're hoping is that some of the technology is going to enable, at the beginning, people to residents of Salinas, residents from California, residents of people from anywhere, to actually find out about what this history is. It can also be very useful in the school system, you know, in elementary schools. We won't be bringing the kids down there until it's safe to do so, but they can certainly take part in the walking tours and whatever other virtual exhibitions that we construct. Now, it is possible that some of this material will be temporarily housed not in the Republic Cafe, but at the National Steinbeck Center. There's a whole space there that we might be able to acquire. And that is a place where everybody comes. It's just right across the railroad tracks, but it's, you know, it's like the space that everybody knows. And so that can be a venue for bringing wider audiences to. And then also there's a lot of college students in the area. There's community colleges, my university, and several nearby that will also be a potential audience. Yeah. Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Rina. Al Thompson from Melbourne. That's a wonderful showcase of ways of presenting memory and place. I've got a really practical question about your walking tour and the extracts from the interviews that you're showing, which is whether or not you might subtitle them, because although you want people to look at their faces and listen to the voices, but actually you often can't work out exactly what people are saying, and whether you might have, you know, a transcript subtitle alongside.
Yeah, I realize that now because I understand these things, but I'm having trouble understanding you guys through microphones. So yes, it's a really excellent suggestion that we have somehow a window that opens up this field. Right.
Thank you, Rina. I'm just going to have a final word as a geographer in a former life and a historian who's working with food and cafes as third spaces. I found that really fantastic and fascinating presentation, and I'm sure that everyone, as with most oral history projects, identified with a particular part of it and kind of took it with them. So I'd like to thank you very much for that fascinating talk. I was totally immersed in it. Couldn't even hold the timer up. I also need to remind you, our editor has said that we can collect our journals at morning tea. As many of these need to be picked up as possible during the conference to save postage. But thank you so much for this morning, and enjoy the conference.
Well, it almost worked. Almost.